Hello, and thank you for joining Johnson Lambert's webinar, How to Shine in a Virtual Recruitment World. I'm Megan Mansfield, the Campus Recruitment Manager at Johnson Lambert, and I'm joined today by Johnson Lambert's Director of Human Resources, Sarah Huddleston, who I will introduce shortly. But first, I would love to cover a few administrative items. So for the best viewing experience, we recommend closing all other applications or tabs, disabling any pop-up blocking software, and enabling Flash Player on your device. If you have any technical difficulties viewing or hearing the webinar, please start by refreshing your browser. And if you continue to experience any issues, you can click the help icon at the bottom of your screen. That will direct you to On24's Event Help Guide. In the bottom menu, you will also see a few other icons which will direct you to Johnson Lambert's social media accounts, contact information for Sarah and for myself, a resource list of some of our recruiting materials, and the Q&A. We highly encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A window throughout the session. We will be answering questions throughout and at the close of the presentation. All right, so let's get started. I'm so glad that you are here joining us. And as mentioned previously, my name is Megan Mansfield, and I am the Campus Recruitment Manager. I'm responsible for the overall recruiting strategy and process at Johnson Lambert, as well as partnering with all of our local offices to ensure that they grow with amazing candidates. And I've been in campus recruitment for roughly 5.5 years, and I've been with Johnson Lambert since 2019. And now I will pass it off to Sarah to share more about herself.
Great. Thank you, Megan. I'm Sarah Huddleston. I'm our Director of Human Resources. I've been with Johnson Lambert since 2006. I'm super excited to be here today to talk with you about all of the opportunities that we have to sort of reinvent ourselves through a virtual experience in recruitment. So I look forward to spending this time with you and hope that you come away with some very helpful tips and information to make you feel more confident as you go into the recruitment season.
Awesome. So we're excited that you are here. And a couple of months ago, Sarah and I were connecting about fall recruitment and discussing the articles and research that we've been doing amidst all of the changes and sharing what we had heard from our summer interns. And during that conversation, we discovered we had some thoughts and information that we thought you might find helpful, which landed us here today. So we hope that you will find these topics and tips helpful as you move forward into a virtual recruitment world. And let's see, we'll go to the next slide here. On the agenda here today, you will notice the following. First, we have core values, personal brand, creating awareness, transitioning skills virtually, planning for distractions, and virtual recruitment at Johnson Lambert. And in diving into virtual recruitment, in-person recruitment, evaluating the differences, what we found is there are many similarities. And although there are many similarities due to the lack of personal connections or side conversations that you might have in the in-person recruiting events, it's even more so important to strengthen your in-person skills to be able to transition them virtually. So we first want to cover core values in your personal brand. And in order to know what you're looking for in a future company, what companies you want to speak with in the fall, how to narrow down which employers you want to sign up to speak with, it will be important to figure out your core values and how to identify a company's core values and why it's important that they align. Then we'll cover the personal brand. And a personal brand is what you want others to observe or recognize about you. And identifying your core values and your personal brand will make it more effective when answering interview questions and allowing yourself to make your points more concisely and confidently. And then once you have a good understanding of personally what you're looking for and more confidently in who you are, we'll transition of how you can use that to create awareness of your environment in the virtual recruiting world and the environment for others as well. And following that will be how to transition your skills into a virtual environment and capitalizing on your time and finding out what you need personally to make informed decisions. And after we've uncovered how to transition those skills, we will then speak to how to plan for distractions and reality. And although there are a lot of skills and characteristics that are similar transitioning virtually, we need to know how to plan and feel more confident for all of the what if virtual moments like, hey, I still can't hear you. And finally, we'll wrap up today with the variety of virtual events you could expect and how Johnson Lambert will be conducting recruiting. And as stated previously, please be sure to ask questions in the chat function throughout, and we will answer them in a way that makes sense. So before we dive into our first topic, I want to kick off today with a poll and evaluate how our audience is feeling. And so the question is, how confident do you feel about virtual recruitment? And the first option is extremely confident. You don't feel like it's any different. You feel just as confident as you would in a in-person recruiting situation. Confident, moderately confident, or totally lacking confidence. You don't feel confident in this whatsoever. So I will give about another 30 seconds for everyone to get their answers submitted. And remember to select your choice and then press submit, or I won't be able to see it from my end. All right, let's view the answers. So everybody's feeling, moderately confident. There's very few people that are feeling extremely confident, and some lacking confidence. So really responses all across the board. And regardless of how you answered this question today, Sarah and I's hope is that you're going to leave today feeling more confident than you did when you just answered. So now I will turn it over to Sarah for her to talk about her first topic, which is core values.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. So I think everybody is probably familiar with core values in the context of looking on a company's website. Most companies have them pretty plainly stated, and they really should be a differentiating factor. So what makes this organization special? How does that align with how you view the world and what you want from an employer? Ideally, these are things that should be unique to that organization and guide every decision that's made, how people interact with each other, what is valued, what happens when we disagree with each other. All of those things sort of feed into the core values of an organization. And the biggest thing about this, both in terms of organizational core values as well as your own personal values, is how are they modeled? So it's one thing to have a bunch of words on a website, but what really matters is how they're modeled or how people behave in the context of letting those core values guide every decision that is being made. And so what I think is usually really helpful is to have some kind of self-assessment. And be able to sort of understand what it is that you're looking for in an organization so that you know how well your values align with an organization's. So when we talk about different types of values, one of the things that I've learned in some of the reading that I've done is that a lot of times companies will have different types of values than their core values that might even be stated on their website. And so those might be aspirational values. So values that maybe an organization wants or needs in order to succeed, that maybe in light of changing circumstances needs to adopt new values that they don't necessarily have at the present moment. So a perfect example of that is if an organization did not allow employees to work remotely. Maybe as the pandemic hit and we recognized that that was a business essential work arrangement, an aspirational value might be flexible working arrangements. And we, as an organization, I think Johnson Lambert has done really well at making that transition because flexibility has always been part of our culture. But I think that it's important to really understand whether a value that's stated on a company website is the actual core value that's driving every decision and behavior, or if it's something that they're aspiring to be or aspiring to have in their organization or culture. The permission to play values was an interesting one that I researched as well. And that's really what an organization has to have in order to do business in their sector. So for example, integrity. That's something that every organization, particularly in public accounting, needs to have, because without that, there's not trust in the work that you're doing. And so while that obviously is a very important value, it doesn't necessarily differentiate an organization and give you sort of a sense of how they're different from the next organization that you might be considering. And the last one on here is interesting as well. It's accidental values. So when maybe a group of employees that, has a very strong opinion or, loud voices about what they want to see, maybe they're modeling these values already, but it's not necessarily ingrained in all of the decision-making at the highest levels of leadership. So making sure as you're looking at an organization's values that you kind of have a sense of where they are on this different spectrum of values so that you know whether it's aspirational, permission to play, or accidental values that they're sharing with you. So tying core values to interview questions. I think it's important to develop a systematic way to tie these core values to every answer that you give. So what does that mean? You have to ask yourself, what is the question really asking? So from a purely practical standpoint, when you're in a virtual interview, you have less time to make that first impression. You don't have the option to be able to see a full range of body language. And so really sort of making sure that when you're listening to a question, you get to the root of what they're really asking about. I think that it's a helpful strategy to rephrase what your perception of the question is. So it might be, something about, tell me about yourself. And if there's something in particular that you want to share, this is your opportunity to rephrase your perception of what that question is asking. So it might sound like, I think you're asking what makes me unique or how I'll add value to the organization. So let me tell you about that. Tying your answer to a core value. I think, again, this is where that self-assessment of understanding what you value, what's your non-negotiable as you're going through the interview process. This is an opportunity to showcase that. So, and there's I think an example on a subsequent slide that we'll talk a little bit more about how you can kind of make that transition seamlessly. And provide a specific example. I think probably everybody at some point during your interview experience has had the behavioral-based question. Tell me about a time when. And that is based on the philosophy that your past decisions and behavior are your best future predictions of how you'll behave and decide when you're potentially hired by that organization. So being able to provide a specific example or a story engages your interviewer, lets them know that you're drawing on your own real experience. And so making sure that you're tying that into your answer is really important. And then offer a segue into demonstration or proof. So if you're talking about how you value continuous learning, talk about why that's important to you and what you've done in order to continue your own learning and development independently. So we've got a possible scenario. The question might be, why do you want to work for us? And when you think about that question, you could take that in a lot of different directions. But ultimately, the way that you can shape your answer to best highlight you and your values and skill set is to rephrase it, to sort of paraphrase back to them what you hear. So when I hear that question, I think you want to know how I would make a positive impact at your company. So many times in an interview, the candidate is curious about what benefits do you offer or how can I learn in your organization? And so it's really important to think about how you as the candidate can contribute back to that organization. And that's really what the interviewer wants to know and wants to hear. So in continuing this answer, one of my core values is perseverance. When faced with adversity, I seek ways to focus on the positive because I know what I focus on will expand. And then providing an example. For example, during this time at home when I haven't been able to be with friends or family, I decided it was a perfect time for me to start practicing yoga. Maybe it's something completely unrelated to the job, but it does give an example of both who you are as an individual and a skill set that you're cultivating, the skill set of perseverance, and that you're not going to be scared away by adversity. I found that yoga has really helped me persevere through challenges without getting stressed out. Certainly in public accounting, stress management is very important, and that's the case in many professions. So being able to highlight how you can mitigate that stress is really important. And then I feel like this experience will make me a great fit for your company because I know how important it is to manage stressful situations and continue learning. So obviously this is a pretty, lengthy answer, but I think that when you practice this and sort of fill in the examples and the core values that are unique to you, It's the best way to highlight who you are and how you're different from any other candidate that's applying for the same job. So we're going to move on to the next section, which is personal brand. And I know that Megan gave you a good overview of what that means in this context. But when I think about personal brand in a virtual recruitment setting, I think about, and you'll probably hear us say this multiple times, but begin with the end in mind. So if at the end of that interview, you want that interview to walk away with a snapshot of who you are so that they can advocate for you in subsequent settings, this is what your personal brand is. So this is what makes you unique. It's what makes you memorable. It's the picture that you want that interviewer to walk away with and be able to convey to other people who might be part of the hiring process. So what does it mean when you're building your authentic identity? I think especially as a student, you're making this transition from an environment where it's maybe been heavy, academics, heavy social, maybe some work environment or part-time work, but you're taking all of these different components of your life and you're building the best and most authentic you. So I think that it's important to be able to take aspects of all of those different settings and be able to highlight those in the virtual recruitment environment. And so even if you think that something isn't directly related to what the company is doing or what the interviewer is asking about, I think it's perfectly fine to bring in an example of a social setting. It might highlight how you build connections or how you might translate those skills into client relations and developing those aspects of what you offer as the best and most authentic version of yourself. With the academic piece, if you're interviewing with public accounting firms, most of them are looking for very similar sort of, boxes to check off. Are you an accounting major? Do you have a certain GPA? Are you pursuing the CPA exam? And so making sure that that you're able to highlight those aspects of your academic experience, but take it a step further, being able to highlight the specific and unique things that you experienced at school will differentiate you from your peers that, more or less everybody sort of has those initial baseline qualifications to even get an interview. So building your brand, why is this so important? The notion of authenticity comes to mind. So in order to be authentic, you have to know who you are and what's important to you. I think that that's why doing that self-assessment of your core values is so important before you go into this virtual recruitment setting, because you're basically having this very pivotal moment where you don't have the benefit of, the full body language or the handshaking or the sort of usual customary signs and settings of an on-campus interview, for example, or a career fair, where maybe you're talking a little bit more, about things that are sort of outside the general scope of the job. So making sure that you know who you are and what's important to you is so important. It's also important in the sense of belonging. So finding an organization that is going to nurture the best parts of you and that values the same things you do. So it might be, for example, you really want to find an organization that values an investment in learning. And so going back to that core value, if that's something that is stated or that's part of the daily life of somebody who works at that organization, making sure that you understand what programs are in place or what expectations are there so that you know that that aligns with what your personal and professional goals are will make you feel like you belong here and you're part of something bigger than just you as an individual. Typically what we see with a greater sense of belonging is that people stay at an organization longer. And so it saves you the additional job search, and it also makes you feel more comfortable and certainly, happier with an organization where you feel like they're aligned with where you want to go and where you are today. I think that also making sure that you're forecasting your goal setting. So right now, you're looking at maybe the next, 1-2 years. You're maybe looking at getting an internship or a leadership program, or maybe even a full-time job. Most people typically aren't sort of forecasting beyond that. And I would really encourage you to do a little bit more of that forecasting so that that forecast can change as just, sort of a benchmark or a target, but that you also know, is this organization a place where I have longevity? How long is it to get from day one to potential partner path, if that's a goal for you? And then making sure that you hold yourself accountable, that as your personal brand evolves, and making sure that you understand that it should and will evolve both based on your professional goals and aspirations and as you achieve different benchmarks that you've set for yourself, but also your personal life. Once you have other things outside, of the scope that you have now, that's going to evolve. And making sure that you have an organization that can sort of track with you and has the same level of support and opportunity through that forecast. I would recommend, ideally doing a forecast maybe every 6 months and sort of revisiting, is this how I still feel? Are these goals still aligned with where I want to go? Have I achieved certain goals? And I can kind of move on to the next iteration of it. But ideally, you would basically take your core values and have some sort of benchmark or goal under each of those categories so that that's your sort of guiding plan as you're going through your job search. And that's important in a virtual setting because you have less time to make that impression. And it's important to have that sort of cadence and understanding of where you're going in order to stay on track. So aligning your brand with the organization, again, it goes back to what's the top priority for you. And that may be something now that it's not a year from now. You may be sort of evolving over the course of time, but making sure that your priorities are aligned with the company priorities. Does a company only expect you to stay on board for 2 years? Is that what your goal is and that you'd ultimately move to something else? Or do you want to find an organization where you can learn and grow and you'll have mentorship and support from a systematic level? And also we talked about a little bit about non-negotiables. So what is something that would make you say, absolutely, if this company doesn't have X, Y, Z, I can't join this organization? And that might be something as simple as, is it okay for me to question my supervisor? When people disagree, do they do that in a respectful manner? Is conflict avoided in an organization? And so these are all questions I think that are fair game to bring up, in that interview. If your interviewer says, do you have any more questions for me? Asking about how people are invested in over the course of their career, how people voice their opinions. I know, for example, we do pulse surveys to get feedback from our employees. What are the avenues that you can provide your voice and be heard if that's something that's a non-negotiable for you and who your brand is? So with that, I will turn it back over to Megan.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Those are all great points. And during Sarah's part of the presentation, we had a question around in person. It's a lot easier to be more personable and connect, but in a virtual interview environment, how can you keep from sounding robotic, I think was the language that was used. And my suggestion for that would tie back to Sarah's last topic, which is authenticity. I think that the more that you can be authentic, I think sometimes in a virtual recruiting world, it's easy to type out your answers because you cannot be on the fly and it's maybe makes you less nervous, but be authentic, answer those questions, make eye contact, engage in the conversation. And I think that will help you seem a lot more personable. And especially from my experience in conducting interviews up until this point, that has definitely stood out to me as somebody who is interviewing future candidates. So hopefully that will answer that person's question. So with that, I'm going to continue. And up until this point, Sarah has given you material and ideas to start help identifying your core values and aligning those with your personal values, as well as personal brand and what it means and how to start determining yours. And taking all that you've learned and jotted down up until this point, I want to start talking about how to create awareness. And so I'm sure you're wondering where I'm going with this, but in order to identify, core values, portray your personal brand, and capitalize on the recruitment opportunities this fall, it will be crucial that you have awareness of what the environment, expectations, and assumptions might be to plan appropriately. So some of these questions might include talking about your environment. What's the structure of the event? Is it going to be a big group environment? Are you going to have the opportunity to break out into breakout groups? Will you have the opportunity to speak with a member of the organization in a one-on-one like chat room? Is it going to be video? How long will you be able to speak with the different people of the organization? I know in talking with a lot of the career centers, sometimes it's 5 minutes and sometimes it's 30 minutes. So making sure you're doing that research beforehand. Look into how the Career Center has marketed the event. What are they suggesting that you do? A lot of career centers are hosting information sessions and preparations events to make sure that the candidates are going to be ready for the career fairs. So make sure that you attend these. This is going to be a great way to gain the knowledge of what this organization is doing and how they're marketing their events. And how they're marketing these events to the employers is going to be what the employer is expecting. So you know how to tailor your conversation, your questions, and the time allotted for those things. So the next slide, Sarah mentioned this before, but you're starting by doing this with the end in mind. And what are the things that you absolutely want to take away from your time with the company, and what questions do you need answered? So you're thinking about the structure of the event, the time that you have, and then you're able to start planning with exactly what you need. So make a list of the things of, the core values that you find really important, or the questions that you really need answered, and rank those from most important to less important, and make sure that you are able to walk into those conversations getting the questions that you need answered, the most important especially, first. That way you're able to walk away. The employer is always going to get the information that they need from a candidate. They're going to interrupt and ask questions. They're going to make sure they have your resume or your unofficial transcript. So it's really important that you come in walking into the conversation with the employer confident, knowing exactly what you want to be answered, and then doing, speaking up and asking so you're able to gain that information, and that will make you stand out. I can't tell you how many times a candidate that's confident, that knows exactly the questions they want answered, are the ones that definitely stand out the most to me. So up until this point, we've talked about awareness in the context of yourself, which is vital to understanding and being aware of others. So most likely you will be on a virtual recruitment events with other candidates, as well as yourself. So awareness of others is also crucial, and making sure that you're aware of the time, straying away from dominating the conversation, and finding ways of engaging others. Being a team player and having an awareness of an allotment of time and what you want to accomplish will be extremely impressive to an employer. So here's a possible scenario. When you're initially joining a breakout session, you will more than likely have the opportunity to introduce yourself, and use this as an opportunity to speak to what you're wanting to learn more about. So like I was mentioning before, the employer is going to get what they need from you. So starting the conversation with something like, "My name's Megan Mansfield. I'm a senior at Sample College. Thank you for taking your time to speak with us today. After doing research about Johnson Lambert, it prompted me to join this conversation. Two of the things I value and are important to my career search, and I would like to know more about in the context of Johnson Lambert, is the autonomy that I would have in my career and the people I would be surrounded by. Would it be possible to cover these topics in our time together today?" And then you can acknowledge the other candidates in the conversation by asking them, does either of those questions resonate with you as candidates? And is there something else that you would like to add or that we could discuss that's important to you today? So you are coming in prepared. You know exactly the questions that you want answered. You've displayed that you've done research about the company, which I will cover in just a few minutes. And then you're engaging the other candidates in the conversations as well. And by being that direct, confident, aware of others, you will most certainly stand out to employers. So now let's transition to how to plan for a virtual environment, whether you are enjoying a career. Let's transition to planning for distractions in reality.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. So we're going to do a quick survey just to get a sense of what the group is thinking about. So when you think of distractions, particularly if you've got an important interview and you're feeling like you've teed yourself up for success, what's something that you feel like could totally derail you? So roommate, family members entering the room, no professional space available. I'm interviewing from my childhood bedroom. Background noise, maybe somebody mowing the lawn or a dog barking, poor internet connection, or all of the above. So just remember, once you make your selection, to hit submit. All right, give a couple more seconds for that before we see our results. All right, so it's kind of across the board. I think it all just kind of depends on where you're sitting in that moment, that's for sure. This is definitely something that I can relate to, and sometimes the best laid plans get sidetracked. So I think especially in this environment, you're going to have a lot of empathy across the board. So going into this discussion, I think it's important to kind of level set and know that everybody's going to have some level of distraction given current circumstances. So what are some of the things that can come up that we can kind of mitigate? The space or backdrop. I think to the extent that you're using Zoom, they have some really cool backdrops that you can use. And you might be in your childhood bedroom, but you've got this really cool virtual backdrop. I think also just having something as simple as sort of a blank white sheet behind you, or having a wall behind you might be a helpful way to sort of camouflage where you are, not only to keep you focused, but also to keep the interviewer from being distracted by things that maybe aren't going to enhance the experience. The other thing is lighting, and we notice this a lot, particularly if somebody has light shining in, it sometimes can cast a shadow on your face. And so making sure that you test that out before you go live. Noise level, I always think that headphones are helpful. So to the extent that you're able to use those, definitely do. But also just know that sometimes there are things that are out of your control. I have a chronic leaf blower who comes by my house, and it just so happens to always occur, when I'm doing a video presentation or something that I would prefer not to be distracted by. Movement, people moving around in the background, pets, that type of thing, or general interruptions. Maybe it's, a delivery person ringing the doorbell and your dog is going berserk. So there are a lot of different things that unfortunately can happen. But I think being mindful of your space and just sort of trying to use humor to diffuse something if it does come up. And I think, like I said before, a lot of people are in the same boat, and they're probably going to be able to laugh with you and move on from it. We're all kind of human in this, current circumstance. But how can you proactively minimize? So one, test the environment. I would definitely encourage you to get, on a Google Hangout or whatever the type of platform that you're using, if you can do that, to test out the environment. Making sure that the light looks right, that your internet is working properly. If you do have a larger screen that maybe you're looking at, making sure that maybe you get a camera to put on top of that. So all of the different things that maybe you don't see as the candidate, having a trusted friend sort of take a look from the interviewer's standpoint is going to help you out tremendously. Definitely test your technology, whether it's something as simple as your headphones, your internet, your microphone, making sure that all of those things work, and test them, maybe a week before and then maybe a day before your big interview, just to make sure that everything is functioning the way that you're expecting it to. If you need to, get additional equipment. I know that one of the things that keeps on popping up on my Instagram feed is this camera that you can attach to your larger monitor. And that way, you're not getting kind of an unflattering angle if you're looking up or looking to the side to have a view of your monitor, and your interviewer is getting either a profile or just kind of an unflattering view, a view that kind of distracts from the overall experience. Set expectations ahead of time. And this both goes for people who might be sharing the same space that you are. If it's a roommate, say, hey, can I, take you out to lunch if you just kind of walk around the block for the next hour while I have this interview? Or even with the interviewer to say, hey, I just want to let you know I got a new puppy and sometimes he barks a little bit. I hope that's not going to be too much of a distraction. So you've already kind of put it out there. It may also offer a pathway to connect with somebody on a personal level. Maybe they just got a puppy too, or they're thinking about getting a puppy. And it just sort of levels that playing field so that you can have a conversation about something that will make you feel connected. and making others aware of your needs. I think this is really important, particularly if you're in shared space with family members or friends, letting them know how important this interview is to you and what you need from them. If you need them to take the dog for a walk while you're on this video interview, or if you need them to just be quiet for the next 30 or 45 minutes. Setting those expectations ahead of time usually will help you get closer to where you need and have fewer distractions in real time. So possible scenario. So your video interview is going really well when all of a sudden the power goes out. There's a big storm. What do? You're sitting there, in the dark, your computer is out. What are your options? So possible solution, first of all, breathe, pull on that yoga experience if you have it, and then use your phone to chat or email or text the interview to let him or her know of the circumstance. Ask if you can join the conversation with phone only, and just let them know that you're willing to be flexible on how to rejoin the conversation, and then wait for a response. And unfortunately, in this situation, especially if it's a group interview, the interviewer may not be able to get back to you, but at the very least that they know the reason why you got disconnected and that you are still very interested in re-engaging and you're offering a solution in order to bridge that gap. Just before we get on to the next section, I saw that a question came through about at the end of an interview, when the interviewer asks if we have any questions, what are some good questions to ask? I love this question. First of all, you absolutely should always have, I'd say 3 to 5 in your back pocket questions at the end of the interview if they haven't already been resolved or addressed during that conversation. So these questions probably need to be a bit more elaborate or involved than some of the basic things like, when the company was formed or how long the person has been with the company. It might tie back to your core values. You might say something along the lines of, it's really important to me to pursue the CPA exam. Tell me how the organization views this goal and what support they offer to new hires in order to achieve it. It could be something else. It could be something personal to the interviewer. I mean, everybody, I think, enjoys sharing their experience, and it definitely offers an opportunity for you to be out of the hot seat and have the interviewer take the stage. So asking something along the lines of, what keeps you working here and engaged? Or who advocates for you at your organization, and how does that happen? Those are all possible questions that you could ask during that interval. And I'll pass it over to Megan to see if you want to add to that, and then also to talk about our next section.
Absolutely. I think those are all great questions. And I think one of the biggest suggestions that I make as well when it comes to questions is have those questions prepared. And then if there's an opportunity at the beginning, if they're like, is there anything you would want to cover today? Suggest that you have questions and you would love to share them beforehand so the interviewer can answer them in the context of what they have to say in a way that makes sense. And then that way you don't get to the end of the interview and thinking you had all these questions and then they were answered, and it makes you look less prepared. So in the event that you're able to ask your questions before you get started in the interview, I also think that's a great way to move forward. So now I want to talk about how to transition skills virtually. And I feel like in order to talk about how you would transition your skills virtually, you first have to identify what skills is an employer looking for in an in-person environment. So the next slide talks about that. So we have communication skills, professionalism, the interest in the company that you're interviewing for, technical aptitude, and this is your ability to learn and catch on to concepts or work topics. And also, employers will most likely ask behavioral-based questions in interviews, which Sarah has mentioned before. And this is ultimately to see how you typically handle situations, leading them to draw conclusions of how you would handle future situations at their company. So how do you take what an employer is typically looking for and transition that into a virtual environment? So when we're talking about communication skills, it's super important that you articulate clearly. In a virtual environment, we're oftentimes having to use earphones or Wi-Fi connection isn't strong, so you might be breaking in and out here and there, and you might not be able to read somebody's lips like you normally would in an in-person conversation. So it's really important that you slow down, take your time to articulate and communicate really clearly. And do your best to minimize filler words. I think even more so in a virtual environment, it's a lot easier and more common that filler words are used in a virtual environment. And a lot of times this is due to the uncomfortableness, the awkward silences. And I would just encourage you to embrace those, slow down and think about what you're trying to say and minimize the filler words as much as you can, especially since I think they also stand out to an employer more so in a virtual environment than they do in an in-person situation. And then we've talked about this numerous times, but use examples and stories. So has anybody ever heard of the STAR format? I'm sure that you have. And you're sharing the situation and the task, and then what did you do about it, and then what you learned. And what you learned is most certainly, without a doubt, the most important part of the question, because this is what the employer would expect you to apply and do in future situations. And now that we just spoke about how easily it is to get distracted and quickly for, in a virtual environment, giving examples, considering telling the end result first, and then say, allow me to provide an example for you. So it might sound something a little bit like this. So after hearing your question, I have a situation that comes to mind that led me to learn the best way to approach needing more time for a deadline would be to be open and honest with my boss. And I would then provide an adjusted preferred timeline that would work the best for me and move forward and learn from the situation. And let me provide a brief summary of a situation that led to how I learned for this future application. So, and it keeps the interviewer engaged. I think sometimes in a virtual recruitment world, we have emails that are popping up, or our cell phones are sitting right here in front of us, where is an in-person environment, the cell phones are left in the office, there's not email popping up. So you're able to capture their attention by telling them what you've learned and then explaining the example, instead of the interviewer sitting there listening to a 2 or 3 minute example, a little unsure of where it might be going. So I think that's a great way to capture and keep their attention, and really important in the communication skills standpoint. And like we've mentioned before, connect personally if it's appropriate. So most often when I'm or another recruiter is connecting with 12 to 14 candidates per day, the candidates that stand out in their mind are most likely the ones that were confident, answered the questions well, but also that they connected something in their answers to personally. So for example, if somebody mentions that they spent the summer at the beach, or maybe they're from the beach, well, I am too. Or maybe they said they played sports in college. Well, I did too. So chances are I'm able to connect with that person and relate to them on a little bit deeper level. And that allows them to stick out in my mind. So use as many examples as you can, different each time, so your chances of connecting with the person that you're speaking with increases every time, which will lead them to make you be remembered in their mind. And then technical aptitude. So this can somewhat be tied into communication skills. And yeah, they're two separate things. You can be an excellent communicator with absolutely no technical aptitude, but you most certainly have to have strong communication skills to portray in an interview that you have a high level of technical aptitude. So start finding ways to brainstorm different examples, maybe how you transitioned into a remote learning environment, or your internship was a remote internship, and how did you adapt to that? How quickly did you transition? And how do you typically adapt and pivot? Do you need time to process and then you are good to go? Or do you pivot right away and you want to figure it out on your own and don't really need a whole lot of guidance? And give examples of those. And if you don't have work experience in that area, that's okay. Like, I think it's good to use other examples. And an example that comes to mind that might bring life to you is in the summers, I worked as a lifeguard at a local country club. And although that isn't an accounting internship in any way, shape, or form, there are transferable skills that relate to that opportunity. So I was able to develop relationships with customers and remember their children's names that swam in the pool and make connections with them and have conversations about what they did in a professional environment and made them feel valued and really contributed to the culture of the organization. And so I can take those skills that I learned by developing relationships and making the client, in that case, feel important, into an audit room as I, connect with our clients and sit with them at a dinner table, or maybe I'm just picking up the phone to get an answer to a question that we need. So by relating different opportunities and experiences you have to future opportunities is a great way to showcase your technical aptitude and your ability to take skills that you've learned in previous experiences, although not, extremely similar, and relate them in the future. My next topic is professionalism. So be mindful of your circumstances, acknowledge them, but recognize that you're still in an interview. Yes, you might be in your bedroom and you might have your dog in the background, but be mindful of the way that you're sitting. I've been on virtual interviews where the person's like leaned over, their knee is up, and that doesn't come across extremely professional. And your facial expressions, I think it is really easy when you look at other people in a webinar, or maybe you're on a virtual meeting and you see somebody just like completely like stone-faced, and it's like, wow, they are not amused at this conversation at all. So I think eye contact and engagement, the way that you're dressed, is a huge contributors to professionalism and how somebody's going to view you. But I also think that you can keep a professional demeanor no matter the environment. And so an example of that is I was at a football tailgate once speaking with a friend of a friend that happened to be there. And I was sharing with her what I did. And, during that conversation, I realized that she was majoring in public accounting and wanted to get her, CPA. And so I was, learning from her what was important to her, what she wanted to do in the future. And we were talking about future opportunities at Johnson Lambert. And although we were wearing, shorts and a t-shirt, we were in a parking lot, we were most likely drinking a cocktail, I walked away from that conversation thinking, wow, that candidate was extremely professional and carried a conversation really well, despite the circumstances. So I think that no matter where you are or the environment you're in, you still can always carry yourself in a professional manner. And the next thing is the interest in Johnson Lambert, or maybe the company that you're pursuing opportunities with, is crucial. So in my opinion, the biggest, way to do that, is to just research the company beforehand. And employers that attend these events, they do this to ultimately get signed offers. And so an employer is making an investment in an event that's hosted by a college or university to hopefully hire candidates that would be a good fit for their company. So employers are going to focus on candidates that are qualified and seem the most interested in them. And so don't hear what I'm not saying. Sure, there's people that attend in-person career fairs that walk past the booth, they happen to stop by, they learn about Johnson Lambert for the first time and end up working with us. But most of the time, it's the ones that have researched Johnson Lambert beforehand. They know the core values, why they could see themselves potentially working there, and they're seeking out a conversation to learn more and either confirm or deny those assumptions. And in a virtual environment, all of the career fairs that I've heard up until this point, you're having to sign up ahead of time to speak with employers. So genuine interest should most certainly be present. Don't go signing up to speak with every employer on the list and asking them for them to share with you about the organization. They are going to expect that you have researched and have a genuine interest in their company ahead of time. And this also gives you an opportunity to research your interviewer, LinkedIn, Google, the company website, and find out ways to make personal connections or even compliment your interviewer. So the different virtual recruiting formats, just high level, I know we have a wide variety of participants today. There's going to be handshake career fairs, simplicity chat room fairs, conference platforms, Zoom, pre-recorded presentations, and then employers on a lot of different career fairs have the opportunity to use their own platforms, such as On24 that we're on today, YouTube, et cetera. So as I mentioned previously, career fairs are doing a lot of information sessions, preparing you for these virtual events and guiding you of, what the next steps are, how to best engage with employers. So take the time to research those, attend those information sessions so you can be the most prepared. So at Johnson Lambert, we are going to be moving forward in the virtual environment. We'll be, attending career fairs. We will be hosting different club talks at Beta Alpha Psi events. So we will be updating our careers tab on our website to showcase everywhere that we are going to be. All of our on-campus interviews are going to be conducted virtually, but we will be posting our on-campus interview days through the career website so you can know when those are taking place. And we will also put those on our website as well. And then office visits are going to be office dependent, depending upon if our office location is open or not, and then the candidate comfortability. It will in no way, shape, or form take away from you if you decide to move forward with office visits virtually. And depending upon state, local, federal, CDC guidelines, we might be moving forward with office visits virtually anyways. And so if you want to learn more, or this sparked interest for you today in Johnson Lambert, I would encourage you to visit our website and our social media. We have an Instagram and a Twitter page. Both of the handles are at JL_careers. Our website, www.johnsonlambert.com, that also links the majority of what we've been doing on social media. And so after COVID-19 started and recruiting transitioned to a virtual environment, we made a huge effort to make sure that we were interviewing our employees and posting our conversations with them and doing Instagram takeovers so you could see maybe what our employees' life looks like in a virtual environment. And we've started doing office visit tours. So coming soon, you'll be able to see what our offices look like in all our different locations, even though you might not be able to physically visit them this fall. And our LinkedIn page is great to see what we are doing in a professional environment. All of our professional staff publish blogs and conduct webinars like this. So it might give you a glimpse into what life looks like at Johnson Lambert. So I would encourage you to attend those. And make sure that you are checking out all of the different resources that we have provided at Johnson Lambert to teach you and help you to learn more about our company, what we value, and what our people value as well. I think the main purpose behind that has been giving our people a platform to speak and share their experiences and their values so you can hear from them directly, very similar to you would in an in-person virtual environment. So with that being said, it's time for some questions. So
do you want me to read these out and we can kind of tag team answers?
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
Okay, so this one makes me smile because I'm going back in my interview experience to think about how to answer this. But what are common mistakes students make in interviews, online or in person, and how can they be avoided? The first thing that comes to mind for me is if somebody clearly is not familiar with our firm. Maybe they're referencing an office location that doesn't exist, or they're asking very basic questions that a quick look on our website would have given them the answer to. So I think that especially in a virtual setting, doing your homework ahead of time, both in terms of seeming knowledgeable to the recruiter, but also being able to make those decisions like Megan was talking about with the virtual interviews that the candidate has to sign up for those sight unseen. It's got to be very intentional. You're not going to kind of walk by a booth and have an employer say, hey, let me tell you about our company. So that step of the process is, maybe a bit more subdued in the virtual experience right now. Megan, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, Sarah, I'm glad you started with that because I think that is most certainly the thing that makes me less interested in a candidate right off the bat is the fact that they seem, to come in with little research or knowledge of our company. And, I think professionalism is one of the things that comes to mind, and that could be a variety of things. It could be the way that they're holding their body posture. It could be how they're dressed, or it could just be in the language that they're using. I'm not their best friend and we're not texting back and forth. We're having a professional conversation. And so maintaining that professionalism are the things that stick out to me.
I think this is another good question. What are good ways to deal with someone who is interviewing you and seems bored or distracted? That's a tricky one.
That is a tricky one.
I have an idea, but you go first.
Sure. So I think it's always good to be transparent and, have conversations with the interviewer it seems like, I want to make sure that we get the most out of the conversation today. Continuing with the rest of this conversation, what are the most important takeaways that you're looking for, and what are you looking for me? So in the next 10 minutes, I can make sure that you are getting the information that you need, and this is beneficial for you and for me. But I think setting those expectations a little bit and readdressing what the purpose of the conversation is can help that a little bit and re-engage the person, hopefully.
I think also asking them about their own experience, things like what made you decide to choose this company, or why have you stayed here for as long as you have, or what advice do you have for me, sitting where I am, and you being inside the company. Opportunities for the interviewer to talk about their experience sort of forces them to be engaged because they're the ones who are going to have to answer some of the questions that you're posing versus the other way around.
Absolutely. We had the question about being unfamiliar with what the STAR format is. It is the situation, the task, the approach that you took, and then the result of what happened. And I think oftentimes when I'm conducting mock interviews or just real life interviews, the thing that's forgotten in the answer of that question is the result, which is why the employer is asking you the question to begin with. They want to know the result. So when we're talking about the end in mind, it might be good to start with that result first and then back into the situation, the task and the approach. Let's see.
There's also a question on here. How do you initiate a conversation with the recruiter? So I'm assuming that this is in the virtual format. My recommendation would be to look at when they're supposed to be conducting an event at your campus and indicate to them, hey, I'm signing up for an on-campus interview in the virtual format. I'm really excited to talk with you. And, here's my resume in the meantime if you have questions for me.
Awesome. Another question is, do we at Johnson Lambert offer part-time internships? So some of our office locations do offer part-time internships. Some do not. They prefer full-time. So it would just depend on your office location, and I'm happy to follow up with that.
There's a question, is it looked at poorly when a candidate applies for a position that they do not meet 100% of the job or experience requirements? This is an interesting one because if I read this, I'm thinking about the job postings that say we want somebody with at least 1 year of experience, and you're just coming out of school and maybe have an internship experience, but it was only a couple months. And so I would probably, not necessarily highlight that. I would highlight the areas of the job that you do feel like you're 100% of a match for. The other thing to keep in mind is that even if that's not the fit for you in that moment, there may be other jobs in the future. And if you keep that relationship warm with that recruiter, connecting with them on LinkedIn, periodically touching base with them or saying, hey, I got this on my Google alert about your company. Congratulations about the nomination that your company received, or whatever the case may be. It shows them that you have a genuine interest in their organization and that it wasn't just based on one job posting. So I think keeping in touch with those relationships and understanding that those are your network and relationship that you can choose to nurture or not. And if you nurture them, they're more likely to think of you when there is an opportunity that you would be 100% of a fit for.
Absolutely. The next question is, when I'm chatting with potential employer being stuck between asking questions that engage the interviewer and introducing yourself so they can get to know you more in depth, and how should we balance this. And so my suggestion would be, I think about the book that I've read before, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And one of the things that people love to do is talk about themselves. And so a way to engage somebody and make them feel important and interested in you is to ask about them, because that makes them feel important and like you have a genuine interest in them. So I would first start engaging the employer, making those connections and asking about them. And then when the time feels right, or they reciprocate those questions, then that'll allow you a chance to answer questions about yourself. And I think we have time for one more question.
This one I thought was interesting, and it's basically saying, what if a story doesn't pop into your mind when you're answering a question? One of the strategies that I would recommend on this is going back to that phrase, begin with the end in mind. So when you hear the question, think about what they're really asking. If they're asking about a time when, you could say, it sounds to me like you're curious about my work ethic, or you're trying to understand how I problem solve. And that sort of starts funneling you into what your answer could be. But I definitely think having, maybe 5 stories or examples that you can draw from that are unique, and you know exactly what direction you can take those stories, will help you better prepare, so that you don't feel like you're put on the spot and can't come up with something in that moment.
Absolutely. Well, any questions that were asked today that we didn't get a chance to answer, I will follow up with email within the next week. We thank you for being here today and joining us. And our hope is that you're walking away today with some actionable items and some confidence of how to shine in a virtual recruitment world. And we look forward to speaking with you or talking with you virtually in the next couple months. Have a great day.